Okay, here we go. Yechida 7. The Yechida is really a Rabbi Bar Chama's question about how to understand the Mishnah. The problem with the Mishnah is that the Mishnah, if you remember, tells us that the Shomer who chooses to pay, even though he's a Shomer Chinam, he doesn't have to pay. Shilem velo ratzali shava, a Shomer that voluntarily pays and doesn't swear, which is doing a big favor to the Baal, and then later on, Nimtza Haganav. So what's the reward for the Shomer? The Shomer not only gets his money back, which is obvious that he deserves, but he even gets the kefel, and he even gets the dalat v'hei. So if there's $100 pikadon that was stolen, the Shomer voluntarily pays the Baal back, and then a month later, the pikadon is found. Not only does the shomer get his $100 back, but he also gets the kefel, so he gets $200. Or in the case of shor oseh shetvacho umcharo, he would get back $400 or even $500 back for what he did. And the question that Rabbi Bar Chama is going to be bothered by is, how exactly does this transaction work? How does the Baal receive or transfer, the ownership of the kefel to the shomer? What's the mechanism for this transfer? That's really the main source or the main issue that this sugya is dealing with. Rabbi Bar Chama is going to ask a question, and then Rava is going to answer that question with a re-understanding as to what exactly takes place, a reframing of what takes place. And once we understand what takes place, it will also answer Rabbi Bar Chama's question. We will get back straight to the Gemara and move on from there. Okay, so let's look at the Gemara. Let's go right to it. This is what the Gemara tells us. Here we go. Matkif la Rabbi Bar Chama. Rabbi Bar Chama attacks actually the Mishnah, according to Rashi. And he says, I don't get it. V'ha'ein adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam. You're not allowed to transfer something, to sell something that doesn't exist. What's the thing that doesn't exist? The kefel. The Mishnah seems to say, according to Rabbi Bar Chama, that when the shomer...
Brother Kraft?
Time out.
I had Tina on the phone.
Sorry for that interruption. So Rabbi Bar Chama wants to know, how could it be that the shomer, when he pays the Baal in return gives him, so to speak, the rights to the kefel doesn't exist yet. And we'll talk about that in a minute, exactly what we mean by doesn't exist yet. You're not allowed to sell something that doesn't exist. That's a famous halacha. Ein adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam. And the Gemara continues. Va'afilu Rabbi Meir da'amar adam makneh davar shelo ba la'olam. And don't give me that easy answer that I know you're going to say, which is, some people think that you can sell davar shelo ba la'olam, because there's a famous machloket mesachet kiddushin between Rab Meir and Chachamim. Chachamim are the guys that say you can't be makneh davar shelo ba la'olam, but Rab Meir says you can sell a davar shelo ba la'olam. So maybe our Mishnah, which says that the Baal transfers the kefel to the shomer, maybe our Mishnah was written by Rab Meir. Don't even tell me that, because even Rab Meir wouldn't agree to it in this case. Hani mili, when are these words true? When does Rabbi Meir say that you can sell a davar shelo ba la'olam? Kagon perot dekel, for example, in the case of perot dekel, if I try to sell somebody the fruits that will grow from this date tree, it's the middle of the winter now, and I say, you know what, when the spring comes and the summer comes and the fruits go from this date tree, these are yours. And Rabbi Meir says that that's a valid sale. Chachamim say you can't do that because the fruits aren't there yet. I don't know what I'm buying. But Rabbi Meir says you can. Even Rabbi Meir says you can. He only says it in the case of Perot Dekel. Why? Da'avide da'atu, because these are things that are likely to come. Aval hacha, but here, what's here? In the case of our Mishnah, Miyemar de'bigneva. Who says that the object is going to be stolen? Right? Who says, according to Rashi, that it was stolen? Who says that the actual object was stolen? And even if you want to claim that the object was stolen, at the time that the shomer pays the Baal, we have no idea. First of all, we don't know that it was stolen, because maybe he just lost it. Second of all, we don't know that we're ever going to find this ganav, because maybe he'll never be found. Like 80% of ganavim are never found. And even if the ganav is found, even then we don't know there's going to be kefil. Mi yemer de mishalim. He might not. Who says that he's going to have to pay kefil? He's obviously going to have to return the object, but he might not have to pay the kefil. Why not? Dilma modi umiftar, because maybe he will admit it before he goes to court. And if he admits his crime before he goes to court, there's a principle called mode biknas patur. You obviously have to pay back the object, but you don't have to pay the extra fine because you're a good guy, because it's like a plea bargain. You're admitting that you're guilty. We don't have to go through the whole court process. So there are so many things that have to happen over here, says Rabbi Bar Chama, that there's no way that I believe that this transfer can take place. So I want to understand, how does the Mishnah say that when the Shomer pays the Baal in return gives him the rights to the Kefel? That's a classic example of a Davar Shelo Bala Olam, and it's so extreme that even Rabbi Meir, who says you can sell a Davar Shelo Bala Olam, wouldn't allow it here, and therefore the Mishnah makes no sense. Comes Rava, and he totally reinterprets the Mishnah in a way that makes sense. Amar Rava, Na'asaka Omerlo, Likshati Ganev, V'tirtzeh, Utishalmeni, Harei parati knuya lacha me'achshav. Rava says you need to re-understand the Mishnah. Na'asa ka'omer lo. A lot of pronouns here. It's as if the Baal says to the Shomer, to him. At what time does he say this? He says this at the very beginning before he goes on vacation to Hawaii, and he gives over the pikadon. He says, listen, Shomer, this pikadon is yours. It's not yours. This pikadon is mine. And I want you to watch it for me. You're a shomer chinam. And likishati ganev, if it gets stolen, v'tirtzeh utishalmein, and you voluntarily pay me. Harei parati knuya lach me'achshav. I am actually giving you this cow or this pikadon from this moment, from 9 o'clock in the morning on Sunday before I go to the airport. From now, I'm actually giving it to you for keeps. In other words, says Rava, you're right. When the guy gets home from vacation, and the shomer says, I'm paying you because I feel guilty that I lost it or that it got stolen from on my watch, then the Baal has no way of giving over the kefel, because the kefel is an abstract thing. The kefel is the davar shelo bala olam, so there's nothing you can do about it. But at the time that the pikadon is transferred to begin with, when the pikadon is very much ba'olam, you can see it, you can look at it, you can touch it, you can watch it, you can feel it, right? Then you could give it to him for keeps. So it's called a kinyan al t'nai. If the following conditions happen, namely, the cow gets stolen, or the pikadon gets stolen, and you choose to pay me even though you don't have to pay me because you're shomer chinam, then I'm telling you that I'm actually giving you the pikadon itself. What does that help? The reason why it helps is because now we understand why the shomer gets the kefel. He doesn't get the kefel because when he paid the Baal transferred the kefel to him. That wouldn't work. That would be a davar shelo bala olam. He gets the kefel. He gets the kefel because the pikadon itself belonged to the shomer. So whose cow was stolen? The shomer's cow was stolen. If the shomer's cow was stolen, why does the shomer get the kefel? Because it was his cow. Makes a lot of sense. That's Rava's explanation to explain the Mishnah, and that explains why it's not a problem of davar shelo bala olam. And now Rabbi Zera is going to ask another question, and then we'll continue. Matkif la Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera asks the question, Ihachi, if this is the case, if you're right, Rava, that it's actually the pikadon that's transferred and not the kefel, afilu gizoteha uvladoteha nami, even the shearings and the offspring, the kids, children of the animal should belong to the shomer too. If you're telling me that it's not just the kefel that was transferred, but it's the whole parah that was transferred, and if you're telling me that the transfer took place right before the shomer even went on vacation, so anything that happened while this cow was at the shomer's house should belong to the shomer. So the shearing should belong to the shomer, so the children should belong to the shomer. Alam matanya, but why does the Braita say chutz migizoteha uvladoteha? Why does the Braita say that the shomer does not get possession of the shearings and the offspring? You must be wrong, Rava. You can't disagree with the Braita. The Braita says specifically, when the Braita talks about this halacha of the Mishnah, the Braita specifically says that the shearings and the offspring do not belong to the shomer. So that's what we need to understand next. So the question is, how do we explain that Braita? So Rabbi Zera gives not the best of answers, which you'll see. Elamar Rabbi Zera, Na'asaka omer lo chutz migizoteha uvlaroteha. So it must be, says Reb Seir, that we have to just add a little bit to what Rava said. And what we add is that apparently this implicit deal that's made when the Baal comes to the Shomer's house to begin with and gives it over, the Pikadon over, is basically says, listen, yes, like Rava said, it's yours for keeps if the following conditions happen, but it's only yours with regard to things like kefil, but it's not yours with regard to things like shearings and offspring. And the Gemara jumps on that and says, that's really weird. Umay Pascha. How could you make that distinction? And it's not just how could you make that distinction, but why would we assume that this implicit deal goes that way? Like, implicit deal has to make sense, otherwise it's not implicit. Implicit means understood. There's nothing understood about this because it seems so arbitrary just to help us understand this Braita. But why would you assume that you're giving somebody the Pikadon with regard to one thing and not the other? So he says, actually, it makes sense. Stamba de Milta. Normally, Shvacha da'ata me'alma avid inish de makne, Shvacha de migufa lo avid inish de makne. He actually says, you know what, it's not so crazy. Shvacha da'ata me'alma, profits that come from the outside, those are profits that normally people are willing to give over, namely the kefil, right? When I buy a cow, I don't assume that I'm going to make money off it getting stolen and me getting kefil from it. And therefore, you know what the Baal says to the Shomer? If this happens, and there's kefil, you can have it. I don't mind giving that away. Shvacha de migufa, but internal profits, lo avid inish demakne. A person is not really so willing to give away so fast. And therefore, it makes sense that he's not willing to give away the gizotel, larotel, because probably when he bought the cow in the first place, he assumed that he was going to make money or have these gizoteha, laroteha. So it's not such a crazy idea. And now Rava's going to go ahead and say, oh, we're going to hear another version of what Rava actually said. And the other version is the following. Ika da'amre amar Rava. Remember, there was no printing press, so there are different versions. Other people say that Rava said, Na'asaka omerlo likshetiganeh v'tirtzeu tishalmeni, samuch lignei vata knu yalach. Almost the exact same thing, but with a slight difference, which makes a big difference. It's not that the deal is that you can have the Pikadon from now, from 9 o'clock in the morning before I go on my vacation. But actually, you know when you become the owner of the Pikadon? The last possible moment that you could become the owner of the Pikadon, namely a minute before it's stolen. All right, so it doesn't really matter, because that also explains why the kefel belongs to the shomer, because a minute before it was stolen, it became his. And the Gemara asks, "My beinayu, what's the difference between these two versions of Rava? Who cares whether they're retroactively, right? The transaction took place at the beginning when I originally gave it over to the shomer, or at the end, or a minute before it was stolen, which is the last possible moment. What's the difference?" The Gemara says there are two differences. Ika beinayu kusha de Rabbi Zera. First of all, remember Rabbi Zera's question up here, which we said we didn't have such a great answer to? Well, now Rabbi Zera's question is not a question, because now you want to know why the gizoteha uvlaroteha don't go to the shomer. The reason's obvious, because when was these children born? When did these shearings happen? Obviously before it was stolen. Well, if it's before it was stolen, it belonged to the Baal. It only became the shomer's the minute before it was stolen. And therefore we understand why the Braita says chutz migizoteha uvlaroteha. So that's one difference, right? We understand now why Reb Zera's question is no question. We don't have to give this strange answer about the implicit deal being about A and not about B. That's difference number one. Inami, the kaima ba'agam. And we didn't spend that much time in class on this. The other difference is the kaima ba'agam. Literally means, what if it was stolen from the river, so to speak? The only way you can take possession of something like a cow, which you can't just pick up, the only way a person can take possession of it is if it actually is in his property. So, what happens if it was stolen not from your house, which is the normal place things get stolen from, I guess, but it was stolen from you taking it out for a walk by the river, and it got stolen? In that case, according to the first version of Rava, we don't really care where it was stolen from, because when did it become yours? When the shomer brought it to when the Baal, brought it to your house to begin with. But according to the second version of Rava, if the transaction takes place a minute before the cow is stolen, well, there is no transaction then if it's stolen from public property. And in that case, the kefil wouldn't belong to the shomer, because he had no way of acquiring the cow. And the gizotel, larotel also wouldn't belong to the shomer, obviously, because it never changed ownership. So there are two different versions of Rava. The Gemara doesn't establish which version is right, is correct. So we just live with two different versions of Rava, but the question is answered. We understand why it's not a problem of Davar Shelo Bala Olam.